Good morning. Thank you for joining me today. This morning we'll be in Luke chapter 22, verse 54, through chapter 23, verse 12. Then they arrested Jesus, led him away, and brought him into the high priest's house. But Peter was following at a distance. When they had made a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat down among them. Then a slave girl, seeing him as he sat in the firelight, stared at him and said, "This man was with him too." But Peter denied it. "Woman, I don't know him." Then a little later, someone else saw him and said, "You're one of them too." But Peter said, "Man, I am not." And after about an hour, still another insisted, "Certainly this man was with him, because he too is a Galilean." But Peter said, "Man, I don't know what you're talking about." At that moment, while he was still speaking, a rooster crowed. Then the Lord turned and looked straight at Peter, and Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said to him, "Before a rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times." And he went outside and wept bitterly. Now, the men who were holding Jesus under guard began to mock him and beat him. They blindfolded him and asked him repeatedly, "Prophesy, who hit you?" They also said many other things against him, reviling him. When day came, the council of the elders of the people gathered together, both the chief priests and the experts in the law. Then they led Jesus away to their council and said, "If you are the Christ, tell us." But he said to them, "If I tell you, you will not believe. And if I ask you, you will not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the power of God." So they all said, "Are you the Son of God then?" He answered them, "You say that I am." Then they said, "Why do we need further testimony? We have heard it ourselves from his own lips." Then the whole group of them rose up and brought Jesus before Pilate. They began to accuse him, saying, "We found this man subverting our nation, forbidding us to pay the tribute tax to Caesar, and claiming that he himself is Christ, a king." So Pilate asked Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" He replied, "You say so." Then Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowds, "I find no basis for an accusation against this man." But they persisted in saying, "He incites the people by teaching throughout all Judea. It started in Galilee and ended up here." Now when Pilate heard this, he asked whether the man was a Galilean. When he learned that he was from Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him over to Herod, who also happened to be in Jerusalem at that time. When Herod saw Jesus, he was very glad, for he had long desired to see him, because he had heard about him and was hoping to see him perform some miraculous sign. So Herod questioned him at considerable length. Jesus gave him no answer. The chief priests and the experts in the law were there, vehemently accusing him. Even Herod with his soldiers treated him with contempt and mocked him. Then, dressing him in elegant clothes, Herod sent him back to Pilate. That very day, Herod and Pilate became friends with each other, for prior to this, they had been enemies. So you have here, after Jesus was betrayed and given into the hands of these Pharisees and elders and the temple guard here, he's taken before this night trial where they're judging him and having a faux court case. It was essentially illegal for them to hold a trial outside of the normal hours, but for expediency, they did so. And then you have things like this "you say so," where Jesus, in response to the question, says, whether you're a king. He says you say so. From what I understand of the Greek, the verbiage there means essentially yes, but not in the way that you mean type thing. In that Jesus is king, but not in the way that they're thinking of as a political king coming to establish a material kingdom, but rather he is a king, but just not in the way that any of these people are expecting. From Guzik here. They led him and brought him to the high priest's house. Luke did not record the details of this appearance before Caiaphas, the high priest, and a hastily gathered greeting of the Sanhedrin council. Luke will begin his focus at the official daylight meeting of the council. Before Jesus came to the home of Caiaphas, the official high priest, he was led to the home of Annas, who was the ex-high priest and the power behind the throne of the high priest. But Peter followed at a distance. Peter was concerned for Jesus and wanted to know what would become of him, yet he did not have the courage for a clear association with Jesus, and therefore he followed at a distance. The distance would make it much more difficult for Peter to admit his association with Jesus when he was questioned. The rest of the disciples fled. Peter followed at a distance, hoping to prove wrong Jesus' prediction that he would deny and forsake him at his death. And Peter sat among them, finding warmth around their fire, and hoping to blend in. Peter put himself among the servants of those who arrested and persecuted Jesus, having forsaken the fellowship of the fleeing disciples. Peter did not, at this time, want to be identified as a follower of Jesus. But he denied him. Peter denied Jesus in at least 3 specific ways. First, Peter denied even knowing Jesus. "Woman, I do not know him." Then he denied being a follower of Jesus. "Man, I am not." Finally, he denied that he was even from Galilee. "Man, I do not know what you are saying." Matthew 26:74 says that at the last denial, Peter even began to curse and swear, hoping that it would help distance him from association with Jesus. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter. At the crowing of the rooster, Jesus looked through the crowd around him and made eye contact with Peter. Peter was immediately convicted of his sin, not only of his denial of Jesus, but also of the pride that led him to think he could never deny him. Peter remembered the word of the Lord. Sadly, he remembered it too late, after he had sinned. At that moment, Peter's only reaction was that he wept bitterly, yet he would be restored. It was appropriate for him to weep bitterly at that moment, but Peter was not without hope. As much as Jesus' promise that Peter would deny him was true, so was the promise that your faith should not fail. Peter fell, but had not fallen away. Yeah, and that's something that we have to remember as Christians as well, that there is therefore no condemnation to them which are in Christ Jesus. When it was while we were still sinners that Christ died for us. And Jesus has a great deal of empathy for us because he was tempted in every way as we are, yet was without sin. And he serves as our great high priest. Yeah. So sin should drive us to repentance and returning to God because he loves us. Now, the men who held Jesus mocked him and beat him. Luke did not record the proceedings of this first nighttime trial of Jesus before the high priest and the hastily gathered council. He did record what happened immediately after that trial, that Jesus was mocked and beaten by the religious authorities. Having blindfolded him, they struck him on the face. Blinded, Jesus endured these slaps and punches in pain, and perhaps with a concussion. And Mark 14:65 adds that they also spat in his face. It is easy to think that they did this because they didn't know who he was. That is true in one sense, because they would not admit themselves that he was indeed the Messiah and the Son of God. Yet, In another sense, it is not true at all, because by nature man is an enemy of God. For a long time, man waited to literally hit, slap, and spit in God's face. Therefore, God had his glorious work to do, yet all the while, the sinfulness of man was on full display. They found sin to be a game. They found the cruelty of the sin to be delicious, and they found sin to be multiplied. Prophesy, who is the one who struck you? If Jesus were to draw on his rightful resources of divine power and authority, he could say exactly who struck him. Jesus could also say everything there was to know about that man. Yet in all this, Jesus refused to draw on the resource of his divine power and authority, and instead faced this as a spirit-strengthened man. Not only that, he could cause this man to cease existing. However, the very thing they mocked Jesus' prophetic ability had just been ironically vindicated in the previous scene. Peter denied his Lord 3 times, just as Jesus predicted. It was important for Jesus to face this abuse, though it was painful for Jesus to endure and painful for his followers to consider. It was important to demonstrate that the proper reply to hate is not more hate, but love. It was important to demonstrate his trust in God the Father, that God would vindicate him, and he did not need to defend himself. And it was important so that those who are abused and humiliated can find refuge in a God who knows what they experience. I must also call him victorious, from Spurgeon. His persecutors could not make him give way to anger. They could not destroy his mercy. They could not slay his love. They could not cause him to think of himself. They could not make him declare that he would go no further with his work of saving sinners, now that men began to scoff at him and smite him and to spitefully use him. As soon as it was day, on the night of his betrayal and the day of his crucifixion, Jesus actually stood in trial several times before different judges. The order of events can be summarized. Jesus was first brought to the home of Annas, the ex-high priest and the power behind the throne. Then Jesus was brought to the home of Caiaphas, the sitting high priest. There he was placed on trial before an ad hoc gathering of the Sanhedrin, still during the night. When false witnesses were brought before the council and the high priest demanded to know of Jesus if he was the Son of God, to this question Jesus replied, "It is as you said. Nevertheless, I say to you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his clothes, saying, "He has spoken blasphemy. What further need do we have of witnesses? Look, now you have heard his blasphemy. What do you think?" They answered and said, "He is deserving of death." After that, the beating described in Luke 22:63-65 began. Then, as soon as it was day, the Sanhedrin gathered again, this time in official session, and they conducted the trial described in Luke 22:66-71. The elders of the people, both chief priests and the scribes, came together and led him into their council. This daytime meeting of the Sanhedrin council was necessary because by the Sanhedrin's own laws and regulations, the night trial described in Matthew 26:57-68 was illegal. According to Jewish law, all criminal trials must begin and end in the daylight. This second trial was necessary because they knew the first one, the real trial, had no legal standing. According to Jewish law, only decisions made in the official meeting place were valid. The first trial was held at the home of Caiaphas, the high priest, so they called together this trial, held at their council. According to Jewish law, criminal cases could not be tried during the Passover season. According to Jewish law, only an acquittal could be issued on the day of the trial. Guilty verdicts had to wait one night to allow for feelings of mercy to arise. According to Jewish law, all evidence had to be guaranteed by 2 witnesses who were separately examined and could not have contact with each other. According to Jewish law, false witness was punishable by death. Nothing is done to the many false witnesses in Jesus' trial. According to Jewish law, a trial always began by bringing forth evidence for the innocence of the accused before the evidence of guilt was offered. This was not the practice here. The whole procedure was designed for mercy, and even from Luke's summary account, it is clear that the Sanhedrin, when it tried Jesus, was far from keeping its own rules and regulations. "If you are the Christ, tell us." They wanted to hear from Jesus himself if he claimed to be the Messiah. Again, this was all a formality, because they had already passed judgment on Jesus with the illegal trial held the night before. where essentially the same question was asked. If I tell you, you will by no means believe. Given the circumstances that Jesus had already been found guilty, and that the present trial was only a show, this was the perfect response. They pretended to have an open mind and ask sincere questions, but it wasn't true, only pretense. Hereafter, the Son of Man will sit on the right hand of the power of God. This was essentially the same reply Jesus gave to the high priest at the earlier trial. Jesus warned them that though they sat in judgment of him now, he would one day sit in judgment of them, and with a far more binding judgment. Hereafter, oh, when that hereafter comes, how overwhelming it will be to Jesus' foes. Now where is Caiaphas? Will he now adjure the Lord to speak? Now, you priests, lift up your haughty heads. Utter a sentence against him now. There sits your victim upon the clouds of heaven. Say now that he blasphemes, and hold up your rent rags, and condemn him again. But where is Caiaphas? He hides his guilty head. He is utterly confounded, and begs the mountains to fall upon him. From Spurgeon. Of the power. Power is a typical Jewish reverential expression to avoid pronouncing the sacred name of God, which might have laid Jesus open to the charge of blasphemy, though ironically, it was precisely that charge on which he was condemned. What further testimony do we need? At this daytime trial, they made no effort to find testimony against Jesus, because the witnesses at the nighttime trial had hopelessly contradicted themselves. Therefore, they avoided witnesses at this daytime trial. It didn't work first time bringing all the witnesses because they all contradicted each other. But if we can just get him to say it, it'll be fine. It'll be fine, guys. They led him to Pilate. The Roman government did not allow the Jewish leaders the authority to execute a criminal. The religious leaders sent Jesus to Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor over the region of Judea. The Jewish leaders had reason to expect a favorable result when they went to Pilate. Secular history shows that he was a cruel, ruthless man, completely insensitive to the moral feelings of others. Surely they thought Pilate will put this Jesus to death. Philo, the ancient Jewish scholar from Alexandria, described Pilate. His corruption, his acts of violence, his rapine, his habit of insulting people, his cruelty, his continual murders of people untried and uncondemned, and his never-ending gratuitous and most grievous inhumanity. From Barclay. We found this fellow perverting the nation and forbidding to pay taxes to Caesar, saying that he himself is Christ, a king. At the same time, the religious leaders knew Pilate would be unconcerned with the accusation of blasphemy before the religious council. Therefore, they brought Pilate 3 false accusations. That Jesus was a revolutionary, that Jesus incited the people not to pay their taxes, and that Jesus claimed to be a king in opposition to Caesar. Well, it was the testimony of the false witnesses, but it was pretty good false testimony, so we're using that. Then Pilate asked him, saying, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And we can only wonder what Pilate thought when he first saw Jesus. When he saw this beaten and bloodied man before him, Jesus didn't look especially regal or majestic as he stood before Pilate. And this combined with the fact that he was unremarkable in appearance as well. So the Roman governor was probably sarcastic or ironic when he asked, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Pilate was evidently not alarmed by the charge brought against Jesus. Why? Apparently at first glance he saw that the man before him was not likely to be a pretender to royalty in any sense that he need trouble himself about. The "you" in an emphatic position in verse 27:11 from Matthew suggests this: "You, the king of the Jews," from Bruce. It is as you say. Jesus gave no majestic defense and performed no instant miracle to save his own life. Instead, Jesus gave Pilate the same simple reply he gave to the high priest. "I find no fault in this man." This was Pilate's verdict. Though Pilate was a cruel, ruthless man, he wasn't stupid. He could see through the motives of the religious leaders and had no problem in estimating Jesus and the whole situation by the declaration, "I find no fault in this man." But they were the more fierce. In response, the religious leaders became more fierce and emphasized their accusation that Jesus was a leader of insurrection. He stirs up the people. This was a crime that any Roman governor would be concerned with. And as soon as he knew that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod. Pilate remained perplexed and unwilling to stand behind his verdict that Jesus was not guilty. So he sent Jesus to Herod, because Jesus was from Galilee, the area where Herod ruled. Wait, I don't have to deal with this? Get him out of here. The city of Nazareth, in which Christ had continued till he was 30 years of age, and that of Capernaum, in which he principally resided the last years of his life, were both in Lower Galilee, of which Herod Antipas was tetrarch. Pilate was probably glad of this opportunity to pay a little respect to Herod, whom it is likely he had irritated, and with whom he now wished to be friends. The word "sent off" was a technical word for sending a prisoner from one authority to another. When Herod saw Jesus, he was exceedingly glad, for he had desired for a long time to see him. Herod had surely heard much about Jesus, but his only interest was a desire to be amused and entertained. This son of Herod the Great never took Jesus seriously. Certain of the old writers delight to remark that, as there were 4 evangelists to do honor to our Lord, so there were 4 judges to do him shame: Annas and Caiaphas, Pilate, and Herod, from Spurgeon. He hoped to see some miracle done by him. Herod gave his attention to Jesus, and was even exceedingly glad to see him. He wanted to hear from Jesus, on Herod's own terms, and wanted to see Jesus do a miracle. Yet for all this, Herod's interest in Jesus was not sincere, and was to his condemnation, not his praise. As a leader of the people, it was his job to see justice done, and the condemning of an innocent man is not justice. At one time, Herod Antipas had expressed some religious interest. He heard the word of God from John the Baptist. Yet, intending to continue in his sin, and hardened against God and his word, Herod became dead to conscience. At this point, Herod only wanted to hear from Jesus what he wanted to hear. He questioned him with many words. He wanted Jesus to prove himself, demanding a miracle. Many today also demand a miracle from Jesus as evidence, and it may be true that Jesus thinks of them as he thought of Herod. There was left to Herod no feeling towards Jesus but the craving after something new, the desire to be astonished, the wish to be amused. There sits the cunning prince, divining what the wonder will be, regarding even displays of divine power as mere showman's tricks or magician's illusions, from Spurgeon. Then he questioned him with many words, but he answered him nothing. Herod governed over Galilee, where Jesus spent most of his ministry. He had countless opportunities to hear Jesus again and again. Jesus did not speak in secret meetings and in hidden places. All this led Jesus to understand the truth about Herod. He was not a sincere seeker. Herod thought, let's hear an answer from the great teacher. Let's see a miracle from the miracle man. Jesus may have thought in response, I have nothing for you, the murderer of my cousin, John the Baptist. He who answered blind beggars when they cried for mercy is silent to a prince who only seeks to gratify his own irreverent curiosity, from Spurgeon. Jesus understood that Herod was a wretched, shallow man, and had therefore nothing to say to him. The same man who murdered John the Baptist now regarded Jesus as a miracle performer for his own entertainment. Even when others vehemently accused him, Jesus had nothing to say to Herod. It seems that Herod wished for Jesus to put on a magic act for him. Then Herod, with his men of war, treated him with contempt and mocked him. The contempt and mockery showed what Herod really thought of Jesus. When Jesus refused to entertain him, Herod entertained himself by mistreating Jesus. The mockery made it plain that Herod did not take the charge seriously. That is the really frightening thing about the incident. With the Son of God before him, Herod could only jest. But having the Son of God before you is no joking matter. And today, we also have the Son of God before us. And it's not a matter of joking, because we all stand condemned already before God, because we've all committed sin. A perfectly just and righteous God must necessarily punish all sin. And unless we accept Jesus' perfect atoning sacrifice for us on the cross, then we will suffer the consequences rightly due to us. So, don't joke about it. That very day, Pilate and Herod became friends. Significantly, Herod and Pilate became friends that day. They found no common ground except their opposition to Jesus. I do hope if there are any here that are true-hearted Christians, if they have had any ill will towards one another, they will think it a great shame that Herod and Pilate should be friends, and that any two followers of Jesus should not be friends at the sight of the suffering Master. From Spurgeon. To this point, Luke 23 shows three different groups who hated and rejected Jesus. Because of fear and envy, the religious leaders hated Jesus. Pilate knew something of who Jesus was, but was unwilling to make an unpopular stand for him. Herod didn't even take Jesus seriously. He was only interested in amusement and entertainment. Yeah, let's see here. I think I might have gone a bit far. Yes, no. Just there. Okay. Carrying on, Psalm chapter 95, verse 1 through 96, verse 13. Come, let's sing for joy to the Lord. Let's shout out praises to our protector who delivers us. Let's enter his presence with thanksgiving. Let's shout out to him in celebration. For the Lord is a great God, a great King who is superior to all gods. The depths of the earth are in his hand, and the mountain peaks belong to him. The sea is his, for he made it. His hands formed the dry land. Come, let's bow down and worship. Let's kneel before the Lord, our Creator. For he is our God. We are the people of his pasture, the sheep he owns. Today, if only you would obey him. He says, do not be stubborn like they were at Meribah, like they were that day at Massah in the wilderness, where your ancestors challenged my authority and tried my patience, even though they had seen my work. For 40 years, I was continually disgusted with that generation, and I said, these people desire to go astray. They do not obey my commands. So I made a vow in my anger. They will never enter into the resting place I had set aside for them. Sing to the Lord a new song. Sing to the Lord, all the earth. Sing to the Lord, praise his name. Announce every day how he delivers. Tell the nations about his splendor. Tell all the nations about his amazing deeds. For the Lord is great and certainly worthy of praise. He is more awesome than all gods. For all the gods of the nations are worthless. But the Lord made the sky. Majestic splendor emanates from him. His sanctuary is firmly established and beautiful. Ascribe to the Lord, O families of the nations. Ascribe to the Lord splendor and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the splendor he deserves. Bring an offering and enter his courts. Worship the Lord in holy attire. Tremble before him, all the earth. Say among the nations, the Lord reigns. The world is established. It cannot be moved. He judges the nations fairly. Let the sky rejoice and the earth be happy. Let the sea and everything in it shout. Let the fields and everything in them celebrate. Then let the trees of the forest shout with joy before the Lord, for he comes. For he comes to judge the earth. He judges the world fairly and the nations in accordance with justice. Yeah. And that's certainly the proper thing to do concerning God, because he's made everything. And for that, he should receive praise for his work. Yeah. It's interesting, too. He says in 95:8, do not be stubborn like they were at Meribah, like they were that day at Massah in the wilderness, where your ancestors challenged my authority and tried my patience, even though they had seen my work. I think sometimes we have this desire to see God work magnificently among us in some massive miracle. But in the case of the people of Israel, during the time of the Exodus, when they were going out from Egypt, they saw God work with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Yet, despite that, they didn't obey him. Yeah. So just seeing something isn't enough to change our hearts. And the writer of Hebrews also points to the stubbornness of the people in the wilderness. That is, that God swore in his anger, they will never enter my rest. Essentially because of this stubbornness. But a rest, a Sabbath rest, that is the salvation of our souls, is available to us. So while it's still available, we should take advantage of it and come to the Lord. And also in 96, for the gods of the nations are worthless, 96:5, but the Lord made the sky. Everything that's called as a god here on the earth is not a god at all. It's worth nothing. And this is not by a long shot the only place where it says essentially that this pagan idolatry is nothing, or the worship of demons. But the Lord is the one who made the sky. He made all of creation, and as such should be the right target for our praise. And finally here, Proverbs chapter 14, verses 5 and 6. A truthful witness does not lie, but a false witness breathes out lies. The scorner seeks wisdom, but finds none. But understanding is easy for a discerning person. Yeah. A truthful witness does not lie, but a false witness breathes out lies. If one is in the habit of lying, you will get lies in general. The imagery there of breathes out lies is one of, I breathe in and out comes lies. I breathe in and out comes lies. It's just a natural outpouring of what's in the heart of the false witness. Which to me brings up the idea that if you're faithful in small things, then you'll also be faithful in larger things. But likewise, if you're not faithful in smaller things, then you also won't be faithful in larger things. The scorner seeks wisdom but finds none. Sounds like the atheist challenge of, oh, if God would just reveal himself to me, then I would believe him. Where is he at? Type thing. Not realizing that even if God wrote something in the sky, he would think he's hallucinating. And thus, he doesn't find any wisdom. Because ultimately, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and to depart from evil is understanding. Understanding is easy for a discerning person. Yeah, and the discerning person should discern that there is a God in heaven, and that he's a rewarder of those who follow him. Anywho, thank you so much for listening to me today. I hope you have a great day. Bye.